Hey guys, welcome back. We're here to wrap up chapter 3 and also the unit here. So, this will be the final section that we're covering as part of the chapter in this unit. Now, in section 1, we talked about how Americans began to move out to the west, some of the problems that they encountered. We then moved on in section 2 to deal with how they interacted with Native Americans as they made their approach to the west. And then, lastly, here, what we're going to cover today are those issues that are encountered by farmers, and then ultimately how they attempt to deal with them in what eventually will become known as the populist movement. So let's go ahead, let's get started here and begin. So let's start off with the problem that farmers are going to have. Now, as we highlighted in section 1, as you see here on the slide, the problem that farmers are going to encounter the most is the fact that their goods are not going to sell for what they want them to, that the goods are not going to be able to be sold anywhere near the amount of money that they would like to receive for them. And this was due to a number of factors, both of their own causing and of external factors. Now, in terms of their own fault, they once again, as we discussed in section 1, they overproduce their goods. They see an attempt in the market as like, oh, I can produce a bunch of these goods. They're selling for a bunch of money. I'll be able to sell this for a ton and make lots and lots of money. But by virtue of them overproducing the goods, that is then going to lead to their decline in prices. Now, further complicating that is the fact that foreign goods are also pouring into the market during this time. So with the farmers overproducing their goods, not to mention the fact that there are more goods on the market due to foreign competition, prices are going to drive down and farmers aren't going to be able to recoup the amount of money that they think that they can for the products that they're selling. Now, even with the money that they do make, the diminished money that they make, that money is still going to be eaten into. Now, the reason for that is simply that they're not taking the full profit of what's being sold at market. So, for example, if I sell something at Publix, like if Publix sells it for $5, the farmer doesn't get $5 for that crop. They still have to pay out the store that sold it and also the guy who got them to the store. That would be the middleman. So the middlemen, they're the ones who buy the goods first from the farmer. So they're going to be the ones who sell it cheaply to the farmer and then also be the ones who proceed to make all the money off of them. So basically the way that this works, the farmer will say, for example, sell that good for $1 to the middleman, and that middleman is then going to sell it to the store for $3. The middleman's always going to make that $2, whereas the farmer makes $1. Now, of course, the farmers could make more money if they sell it directly, but the thing is, in order to sell the volume of the crops that they're producing, they have to sell to these middlemen. They have to engage, unfortunately, in these tactics, which then, of course, leads to the diminished profit. And when goods aren't selling that well, these prices that the farmers get paid by the middlemen gets even less, and it's just not the best situation for the farmers. You also add to that the high shipping costs put onto them by the railroads in order to get their goods. Basically, railroads would be incredibly arbitrary in trying to, basically they would just make up prices. So even if, like, you could have two packages that are the same size going to the same location, and you would have people paying different rates. So farmers are taken advantage of by this, not to mention that the goods that they're buying, in order to raise their farms, to raise their crops, those are being sold at an exorbitant price as well. But this still isn't the end of the problems because, of course, they're not. So as we see here, I'm sorry if you're disgusted a little bit, but this is the boll weevil, which will plague the South, eat all the cotton crop, and thus add to further Southerner farmer misery. If that's not enough, the drought is going to take over in the Great Plains, so that's going to affect crop yields, as you might imagine. Foreign goods will continue to do well. Also, there's isolationism, so depression and all that. So it's just not the best time to be a farmer. And if that's not enough, the economy is also conspiring against them, as the United States is based on what we call the gold standard. Now, what that means is the amount of money that is available in the United States is directly tied to how much gold that they have. Now, what this then does is that it limits the amount of money that is available in the market, and so it then affects how much money that farmers can get. And because of that limited amount of money, that then leads to the farmers having to become more dependent on loans, which drives them further into debt, which means further problems and further susceptibility to all the problems that we see that we've discussed here. But farmers are going to try and answer back for this. Now, that answer is going to be what we call at first the Grange movement. Now, the Grange movement takes its name from the French word for barn, that being grange. Now, the idea here is that farmers could, at least at the very minimum here, at the very beginning of their issues, they could at least talk to someone else. They can at least, talk with other people who understand their problems that are not their family members who are living with them on their farm. So, led by Oliver Hudson Kelley, he brings them kind of all together here in order to try and, alleviate some of the loneliness. But what are farmers going to discuss at these meetings and gatherings? Of course, they're going to talk about farmer things. So they're going to share like new technology, new tricks. And also one of the interesting things that they come up with are what we call co-ops or cooperatives. Basically, they come together to pool their money in order to try and chip away at the monopolies, especially of farm equipment. So they knew that they by themselves couldn't get a discount, but maybe if they all band together and buy the machines in bulk, like you would like at Costco, that maybe then you could get a discount on those goods. Now, what they realize though is that, discounts and talking to other people is not going to solve all of their problems. That someone needs to take on the industries that are hurting them, especially, for example, the railroad industry, which the railroad and storage industries are really what are screwing over farmers more than anyone else. So they begin to take action via what we call Granger laws. They push their local politicians to pass laws regulating the railroads, and they believe that by getting politicians into office that support their ideals, that then they would have people there who can help support them and bring about the change that they actually want. Now, unfortunately for the Grangers, many of the laws, while they do pass initially, they don't pass constitutional muster. The reason for that, as we see in the cases of Munn v. Illinois, and then Wabash, St. Louis, and Pacific Railroads v. Illinois, is that these laws are often unconstitutional. The reason being that these laws in regulating railroads, the states weren't really able to, as those state laws would affect railroads that went in between more than one state, which then makes it part of the federal government, which means the federal government had the right to pass laws, not the states. Now, ultimately, though, we do see them the push for a federal law to be made, and that is the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. So in your notes, please make sure to highlight that. So to kind of emphasize that point, let's go ahead and highlight it here. So as we see, the Interstate Commerce Act, it was a federal law that allowed now for the federal government to regulate railroads and other interstate businesses. Now, how will they begin to do that? So first, railroads have to have the same price for all of their customers. They can't do as they had been and charging one customer one thing and another customer another thing simply because they knew that they could. So you had to have standardized pricing. You had to charge everyone the same thing for the same service. And also, you had to say what those rates were. You couldn't just surprise them. You had to post what these prices were and what then you would then do about them. But also, as we can see here, is that those rates that they do post, they must be fair and reasonable. They can't just charge whatever it is that they want in order to get what they want. So this is the first real big step in the federal government coming in and setting up regulations on these businesses. Now, ultimately, the Grangers, or members who were part of the Grange movement realized that something bigger has to happen in order for these changes to really mean something. So eventually what will occur is the creation of a new political party known as the Populist Party. Now, what unites the populace is that not just farmers, but also Southerners and Midwesterners as well, is that the quote-unquote enemy of the people are big business owners and corporations, so the industrialists and bankers. They're the ones who are controlling everything. So in order to make this a better country, you have to then go with an entity that is strong enough to take on big business, that is strong enough to take on the banks. And to the people, that is the government, that the government is supposed to be representative of the people and protect them from people like the industrialists and the bankers. So then that is going to lead to the creation, as we see here, the Populist Party. Now, as we move on here, we have to understand what the populists talk about. Now, what I want to really, really stress for you guys is this. So whenever you see the term populist, okay, as we see it here, so I'm going to highlight that so you all can just make sure. It is this first choice right here. Unlimited coinage of silver, aka bimetallism. If you ever see on a test the word populism, the answer is going to be bimetallism. If you ever see bimetallism, the answer is going to be Populist Party. This is the main cause of the populists. So what the populists argue is that the main reason for economic despair in the United States is the gold standard. So the idea here is that if you also allow the money supply to consider all the silver that the United States also owns, then you can print more money, which would then create inflation, which would then increase prices, which would then give farmers more money, and then farmers could pay back their debt. That's the whole idea here. People can pay back their debt once we inflate the amount of money in the economy, and everything will be better because of that. That is the populist main point. So once again, to reiterate, populism, bimetallism, unlimited coins of silver. Link those terms together in your mind. Whenever you see them, that will be your answer. Now, other things that the populists had called for here, the government ownership of railroads, telegraphs, and phones. The idea here is that government isn't in it for profit like a business is, and instead it will do things for the people rather than in the attempt of trying to make money. They also called for a progressive income tax, that the rich should pay more in their income taxes than those who make less than them, that people should only have to work 8 hours a day in terms of a full-time job, that the government should be able to store grain, that the people should elect U.S. senators, that the people should be free of being intimidated from voting, that they should be allowed to vote in secret and not have people know who they vote for, that people can vote and create initiatives and referendums, that they can vote on issues and make new laws they themselves without their legislature, without their local representatives. They also called for restriction of the powers of the presidency in terms of the president could only serve one term in office. And all in all these things sound rather good and progressive for the time period, except when you get to that last one, restricting immigration. Now, the main person of populism, the face of populism, is the politician William Jennings Bryan. Now, following the Depression of 1893, money had already become smaller in supply, and populists are going to call for bimetallism. Now, the thing is, the president at the time, Grover Cleveland, who was a Democrat, rejected bimetallism. He still wanted to go along with the gold standard. However, when we get to the election of 1896, William Jennings Bryan is going to emerge carrying the idea of bimetallism and the death of the gold standard as we knew it. Now, he was a populist nominee, but at the convention, he is going to run for the Democratic nomination. Now, you have to remember the Democrats, of course, are the nominees, or rather, the party in power in the South and the Midwest, which is, of course, where all the farmers live. So the populists, who were deeply popular with farmers, eventually they will then carry William Jennings Bryan to win the nomination, which he does through his Cross of Gold speech at the convention. Here he lays out in the speech, so if you would like to look at it here, for example, obviously you don't have to copy this down, but he talks about how the Democratic Party is on the side of the people, and that if they are on the side of the people, they then can't be supporting the gold standard, that we should be having the gold standard because we should get rid of the gold standard, rather, because it's not what's best for us. Bimetallism is what should be embraced, and therefore we should do it regardless if anyone else has it. That if we continue to want to represent the people and be the voice of the people, we can't then be the ones who punish them by continuing the gold standard. Now, unfortunately for William Jennings Bryan, he is going to run into the Republican William McKinley, who, as you might imagine, is going to have the full support of big business, because obviously big business is not going to want someone like William Jennings Bryan to assume the presidency and take power. So you would have corporations and all the bosses, they would tell their workers, look, if you vote for William Jennings Bryan, if Bryan wins, then don't even bother showing up to work. We're going to close down immediately. This will be the death of American industry if you vote for the populace. And due to, threats like this and widespread voter intimidation, and not to mention all the money that is poured into his campaign by people like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, two of the richest men to have ever lived, McKinley is going to win the election by a margin of just over 600,000 votes. Now, in looking at the presidential map, you'll notice here that in red would be those who voted for the Democrats, those who voted for Bryan. If you notice, it's all farmland. All right, so he has the South, he has the Midwest, but the problem with farmland, as we've discussed multiple times here before, it's very rural, it's very isolated in its population, and of course, the states where they do have a lot of industry, where they have the factories, that's going to be where the bulk of people live, so places like New York, Pennsylvania, for example. So in between those two states, you have almost the entirety of the Midwest and South. So just by carrying those two states, in addition, Ohio and Illinois, that's going to win William McKinley the presidency and ultimately defeat William Jennings Bryan. Now, William Jennings Bryan will then run again in 1900, 1904, and 1908, this time, and in those times losing more and more. Following those unsuccessful campaigns, he would then retire to South Florida, where, and again, this is me going into personal notes here, but the greatest thing that William Jennings Bryan ever came up with, the idea for the University of Miami. He actually is good friends with the founder of the University of Miami, not to mention the founder of the city of Coral Gables, and he comes up with the idea that Miami should be a gateway between the United States and Latin America. Obviously, William Jennings Bryan is very forward-thinking here, and so ultimately that idea of this quote-unquote Pan-American University would then come to become known as the University of Miami, created in 1926. So that being said, thank you guys. We have now finished Chapter 3. We have finished Unit 1. So begin preparation for your topic test. Begin preparation, obviously, for the EOC if you're reviewing this later on. And we will be back next time. So we'll be back in a little over a week when we start Unit 2 and talk about the Industrial Revolution. But until then, I hope all is well. You guys do well on your tests. And we'll see you all next time. Take care.